really is something that I did not want to pursue. I've got nothing against the people that do that and do it well. I simply knew it wasn't for me. So carrying on in postgrad studies, I did a course in regulatory affairs, again by serendipity. I thought, hey, this is something new, let's go for it. Never really paying attention to the long-term game. Unfortunately, in youthful foolishness, that was something new, something that sounded interesting and worthwhile, but I really never thought on what to do with that beyond that. At any rate, one presses on. So in that, we were exposed to the regulatory affairs more in a retail pharmacy setting or a retail pharmaceutical setting. And we had a short stint at the regulatory authority, volunteering at the MCC then, and we had a short stint at a pharma company, volunteering there. And then the mood suddenly drops where you think, gosh, I made a mistake. I am going down a path that I don't want. And you realize, simply due to legislation on that side of the fence, for you to really reach your peak, you need to be a pharmacist. You will be a good regulatory scientist at a pharma company, but you will sort of always maybe fall away in the shadows. And if you want to leverage your leadership abilities or move ahead in a team, if you do not have a pharmacy qualification behind you, it may hold you back. So then at that stage, it really was a matter of finding what I didn't want. I never really knew what I wanted. And as the time went by, I stumbled upon an opportunity to join the CRO space. And there, again, this was by serendipity alone. I never knew the clinical trial industry existed. It was not like I intended to join it. I happened to discover it and pursued it in earnest. So grinding one's own teeth with your own studies, we had to go through a bit of a regulatory process there and submit your study protocol to an ethics committee. I studied at the University of Pretoria, so I got exposed to their committee there. And I sort of thought, hey, this is something I can make a career out of should the opportunity present itself. So going through that tickled my fancy, knowing now I do not want to go the retail route. I do kind of like the regulatory aspect. It's a personality thing. I do believe I suffer OCD in a moderate to severe extent. For a personality trait, and personality-wise, that really suited me. But then, you know, in your final years or at the end of your studies, many people may feel in that same position here now. You are desperately seeking employment, and it's really hard to break into that industry. So I happened upon an opportunity to join it though. And of course, as you go in your foolish youth, you know absolutely everything. You've just been through university. You're pretty much just out of your teens if you are fortunate to go to university immediately after school, and you know everything. So there I really delved into a career in clinical trial regulatory. The drawing factor was the interactive aspect. Pharma reg is a bit more lonely. You don't need to really interact as much to get the job done. But at the end of the day, reg is still administrative and paperwork, regardless of the flavor that you are contributing in. So one jumps into a regulatory career. Of course, you start at the bottom. It's admin, it's paperwork. But interesting things happen, and you realize that your background isn't really wasted. It has enabled you to talk the talk, even though you quickly realize how little you do know. Following 4 years of university and thinking no one can teach you anything, within those first 3 months, your world comes crashing down. And there, I really just want to talk you through a bit of a day-to-day in that. In South Africa, I have to say we are fortunate that we have a very mature and developed regulatory framework. Despite obvious challenges we face this year and things like that, you really have the safety bubble around you within which to work. If you're willing to roll up your sleeves and tuck in, you can make it work for you. It is unrelenting and it is chaotic and daunting at times. Really, the only known things are when the next submissions are due and when the next annual report or progress report is due. So that will really try your patience and try your resilience and prioritizing, because if you are in a CRO space and you work with multiple clients, you'll quickly come to the realization that all of the clients want to be attended to as if they are your only clients. and all of the submissions is urgent, and all of their needs need to be attended to immediately. So really planning your day is almost a futile exercise, bar the fact that you can throw in clients from multiple time zones. Just as soon as you think you've paddled through your mailbox on a given day and you're about to shut down your PC, someone in another time zone pulls a surprise on you and there's a new crisis. At any rate, really a rewarding path that one can walk down, even though, as I said, it may not always be easy to break ground and get into that. But there's a lot to learn and a lot of soft skills that you can develop in those areas and move along with that. And eventually, reg itself isn't really rocket science. If you leverage our developed framework, it's basically like following a recipe in a cookbook. Anybody can cook, I believe. So if you are able to apply your mind, apply all of that background you've gained over the past few years, you will quickly stop being despondent. You attract the approvals and you develop. Of course, challenges do come your way that isn't as well defined in any guidance document or in any regulation. That's where things really do become interesting, and where you are moving in that gray area. I think your next move will then really be defined by simply doing what's right and hanging your hat on another side as if you were the regulators. So besides the run-of-the-mill amendments and things that come up, I think unforeseen and unanticipated problems make up the bulk of what's really interesting, and how you get to solve that will really put you in a position to define yourself going forward and build your credibility. So if you would be a student looking for career opportunities going forward into next year, or you are currently sitting in another role, you would like to break ground into the regulatory space, I think it can be really rewarding. It does take a very distinct personality type to go into that and to work with that. As I said, it's basically coordinated chaos, and it will try your juggling skill really, really hard. But the unknown is what makes it interesting, and no amount of experience gained in that sense is ever in vain. Personally, I knew I wanted to be a CRA since I started my career. And there again, it's hard to break ground. The opportunities can be few and far between. I've seen classmates delving straight into trainee CRA or intern CRA roles, while others like myself are definitely not as fortunate and had to take a slight detour. And you do become despondent. You don't see your plan come to life immediately. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, all the cliche antics still hold true, that the right thing will come. It doesn't help you when you are in that situation. They don't sound like encouraging words coming from your peers and relatives at that time. It's absolutely not what you want to hear. And originally coming from a mindset that you will either have to be a medical sales representative or you will have to work in a lab, knowing I didn't want to do either, it's really easy to start seeing the glass half empty as opposed to half full. Then with that, I believe no amount of effort or any education is ever wasted, even though it may be hard for science graduates in South Africa to break ground into what they want to do if you do not want to stick around in a lab and things like that. So one of the drawbacks really was that ignorance was bliss in our high schooling years and in your youth. I eventually declined studying pharmacy, not that I have anything against it, but from my upbringing, what does a pharmacist do? He or she stands in, clicks in a white coat and hands you your tablets. I never ever knew what a responsible pharmacist was or what a regulatory affairs pharmacist was. I never knew that a pharmacist can easily find a job in a CRO space. And if you really don't want to be in a dispensary, there are so many other things, manufacturing, etc., that you could do with that degree. And I was completely blindsided by that. Then in hindsight, would I go back and restart all of this and maybe go down the bee farm route? No, definitely not. I believe in moving ahead and finding your niche. I've been fortunate enough to find my niche very early on in my life. Many people will probably tell you that they haven't really found it. They're on the process of developing and heading towards that. So dealing with all the authorities, dealing with different ethics committees, different personality types, there's a lot of value that you can gain there by being level-headed and seeing the bigger picture. applying sufficient attention to detail. Time management is of the essence, and it's something I often neglect. Your attention gets divided. As I said, you're being pulled in all sorts of directions, and there's a surprise amendment, there's a surprise protocol deviation, and surprise safety event that comes out, and all of it must be attended to at the same time. So chaos reigned, and it's a good stint. I simply left regulatory for the fact that I wanted to move on and see other sides of it. I launched my career in one discipline, knowing that I'm probably only seeing kind of individual. So I've got absolutely nothing against it. Even though if you ask me now, would I hurry back to being a regulatory officer? Probably not. I've always said, and I was criticized heavily way back when I said, I think CRAs have a more structured job. Of course, you don't know what you're going to go and find at site, but you will at least know what you will be looking at. So with the reg stuff, it's not as clearly defined, and it starts and it comes and wanes in periods. If it weren't for COVID studies, I know a lot of people went through very quiet spells, but for all the studies ongoing, there were lots of amendments and changes that had to be attended to still drive that boat through at the end of the day and bring it home. So that's really, in a short 15-minute period, very informally what I wanted to say. I would rather now turn it over to the audience to ask any questions or engage us here. I think our days have been defined by conference calls and presentations and information thrown at you in a virtual space. That's why I really purposefully didn't repeat that here. It is past all of our business days. All of us have 8 hours behind us at the office or at the virtual office. So if you have any burning questions, please address them now. Let's see what we can do there. Sarah, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes.
Hello, Elandré. May I speak, Victor?
Oh, yes. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So, Elandré, thanks. That was really interesting. And I have worked with you, so I know that you are very meticulous with regulatory submissions. I have worked with you in the past. But I have a question that young people who are entering the field often ask me, and I come from a laboratory background. I've worked, at clinical trials at the site, but not, from a CRO perspective. And people say, how do they get into this? What is the best qualification? If you're saying they shouldn't do pharmacy, what is the route that they should pursue if they want to become a monitor or a regulatory affairs person? What is the best way that you would recommend they would go into the field then?
Sure, I'm cautious they're not saying don't do pharmacy. We've got plenty of pharmacists in the business. What I do want to say is you don't absolutely have to be a pharmacist to make ground. So really, in South Africa, with the lack of a clear-cut thing that you must study to break ground, it is a matter of building your network. Pretty much any life sciences bachelor's degree will get you in. Most often, you won't even have to go the postgraduate route. If you want to do that for self-development and if you pursue advanced degrees later on, good for you. I didn't land my job because of an advanced degree or any postgraduate studies. Mine was probably divine intervention in landing at the right place at the right time. So I know the field is very broad. As I said, when you do this generic science qualification, you don't really know which path you will go down, but the qualification will be the lock that opens that key, or the key that opens that lock for that door. Then the thing there is really pursue any opportunity. If you can end up with an internship at a site, roll up your sleeves. You don't have to do it until you are at retirement age. So what I would like to say, don't sneeze at opportunities. If you go into a lab, even if it's not in clinical research, you reach a point where any work experience still counts as relevant work experience, even if you didn't work at a CRO or didn't work on a clinical trial. Then this time of year, and again, this is my personal view, let's see, whatever impact COVID may have had on it and this glorious 2020 year we've had, now's the time where the CROs have already basically started looking at the next year and whether they will be opening up internships or learnership opportunities. I know some of the sites do that. I'm not going to name anyone specifically. I don't want to make it seem like there's a conflict of interest. Look at graduate internships. I know it's extremely hard, and there's no single proven thing that will get you there. It's uncommon, though, in South Africa for medical doctors to be CRAs. I know in Europe it's a thing. If you don't want to practice medicine with your MBCHB, you become a CRA and you go down basically the same path as your BSc or MSc graduate, even PhD graduates. So key number one, a life sciences qualification will unlock that lock for you. After that, you're really going to have to make it your own, develop your soft skills, grind your teeth. People will probably look at me in the CRA chair and think I've fallen into that, but they forget the backstory where you start off doing paperwork and you start off doing possibly the not so nice tasks where unfortunately it may be perhaps a millennial thing where they want to join as a director of the company and not necessarily grind their teeth on the dirty and the less fun work. So yeah, I don't know if that sufficiently answers your question, Sarah. It's a little less defined than one wants it to be, especially if you are in that boat.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting concept. You know, a lot of people raise concerns that the CROs want you to have experience in, say, monitoring. Even though you've worked at the clinical trial site, they don't accept that as experience. I think that a lot of people who've worked at clinical trial sites have that challenge.
I had a talk recently, I mean 2 months ago, with some university students, and the question usually comes out, how did you end up where you were? And I said, really just by accident. And never underestimate the power of networking. Over a cup of coffee at a meeting or somewhere, I applied for a position that I never thought I would be able to get. Got invited to an interview. Unfortunately, as things went then, I was so hopeful that you would make it work, and I would have been devastated had it not. Thinking I'm on the back foot for the CRA positions, even at entry level, they do want some form of monitoring experience. Of course, they'll say it'll be advantageous to you. I thought I was approaching a gunfight with a little pocket knife. And by chance, things worked out. So if you can build your skill set and show somebody something that they'll like, odds are they will grab you and develop you and give you that opportunity.
Right. Thanks very much for the helpful answer. I'm sure you've helped a lot of people with your insight. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Elandré. And I also think that you did mention that there are a lot of opportunities that are currently open for 2021. So people must just look out, go on LinkedIn. You can also send me a message. I also have a few contacts that I can share with. But to ask you, Elandré, regarding regulatory, your first time in the regulatory position and you had to make this initial submission, particularly to SAPRA, you want to maybe take us through that?
Absolutely. And I will say, without divulging too many details, it was for a vaccine trial. So it was the full suite. It had to go to the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. There was an element of institutional biosafety committee review. And the first SAPRA application, I would like to say I nearly didn't make it because one tends to underestimate the effort it'll take. And if it's a large multi-center study, even more so. So blissfully unaware of what punch it would have to take from my side to get it through. Many sleepless nights followed, and we eventually made it. But they really follow that recipe, and the best advice I've ever received back in those days really was think of it from the regulator's perspective. And to anybody on the call, if you are involved with SAPRA submissions and things like that, you really should make it a self-contained thing and leverage your science knowledge in filling in that application form. Of course, there may be things that you will not be able to answer yourself. In that, work with that client. If it boils down to that, work with the manufacturer of the study product as well. So just follow the general framework there, ensure that the quality is sufficient. I've never had an application rejected due to poor quality. I've had questions raised where something wasn't maybe as clearly defined in a protocol. So you're on a good footing just to make it complete. And unfortunately, as it goes, we all tend to shy away from what frustrates us. So just think about the element where if that thing frustrates the reviewer and they can't really critically appraise that and finish off that task, they will put it aside and carry on with the rest of their work. I'm speaking strictly in the MCC days where it was purely by voluntary basis that a subject matter expert would review this and decide, no, this is nonsense, I've got other things to do, I'll look at that later. So going in with that, it isn't rocket science, but make sure that you've completed it well. There's a fine line between adding too little and again adding too much. So they be very particular and pedantic about what you put in there. And of course, if you are working at a site or so, never underestimate the value of going to previous applications and especially looking at previous queries or comments raised by ethics committees or the regulatory authority and address those proactively. So I was in the privileged position where I could go back and see if the University of Cape Town has commented on a consent form concern, or if the University of Witwatersrand Ethics Committee has commented on something there. So go back as far as you can, especially if it's in the same therapeutic area, and pay those previous comments some respect and address them proactively going forward. Unfortunately, because it's paper in South Africa, well, up until crisis struck, keep your printer technician on standby. Those things can smell fear. The printer never fails until it's the morning where the courier has to come and fetch that dossier. Then the printer fails you. So have your backup plan ready. If you are in a wider team, don't be shy to use your teammates' assistance. And if it really comes to just paging through the documents to make sure everything is there and everything is numbered and all the headings are there, get someone in the office, even if in a different department. Just page through it, quickly compare it against the table of contents and things like that. So filling in the form eventually becomes the minor part, and many sponsors will want to review it, they will want to make changes. We see often that a pre-final draft of the protocol has reached you for you to start filling in the application form and piecing that together. And a day or two or three before the submission deadline comes, the final version of the protocol lands, and you were previously given the assurance nothing changed, not much has changed. I've been in a scenario where I had to redo a form through the night. And if you're doing these things for reg, get comfortable with pulling all-nighters. And even if a sponsor is pedantic for an amendment, same may happen. I was the one that eventually once had to say to a sponsor, if you are able to hand me the amended protocol by 5 p.m. South Africa time, I promise you it will be delivered at 10 a.m. the next morning. You'll absorb that punch, you can sleep later. So they've really clamped down on the number of copies that they want submitted. Traditionally, if it's not in lockdown times, that has really helped. But when it comes to the site detail, I think that's probably the most cumbersome part of your application. If you are working with 15, 20, 25 sites, to get all of the staff documents ready and highlight the site details and their recruitment capacities and equipment and facilities, etc., that little chapter of your application form becomes a nightmare very quickly. And we've had applications for multi-center studies where the site staff part forms about 3 or 4 lever arch files of paper for one copy, whereas the actual clinical trial form, the application form itself, is only about 100 pages until you add in another couple of 100 pages of site staff details and site capacity details and all of the other things that go with it, the capacity building and their affiliations. Is it an academic site, a private site? Where will they seek these participants from, etc.? So I'm downplaying how complicated it can be at times, but really in those, it's moments of sheer terror. Thank heavens it only happens about 6 times a year. Unfortunately, though, the sponsors typically want to get out of the gate early. So I think January is by far the worst. The first submission deadline of the year is by far the worst. And really, if you need help from peers, pull in all the help you can get.
All right, thank you for that, Elandré. So we have about 2 minutes to go. If there's anybody with a question, you can just unmute your mic. Okay, yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you, Elandré, for taking your time to come and share your experience.
Before we go, I do see someone has unmuted. Not sure if there's a question coming through.
Yes. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Victor. It's Fezega here. I would like to know how often do we have these trainings, the classes?
Oh, you mean the webinars?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
When again?
So usually bi-weekly, and I will post on LinkedIn. So since I personally know you, I will share the information with you. But
okay,
yeah.
It's usually at the same time, around this time.
Thursdays, 6 p.m.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Also like to just say, if you would like to get in touch with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to send me a message. I also know of the training company that does regulatory training, so get in touch with me and I'll share the information if you would like to know more. And thank you all for taking your time to join me this evening. Have a good evening. Thanks, Elandré, for your presentation. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Go well. Bye-bye.
Thanks.